Criteria 3. Explain literacy foundations. In this section, we're going to talk about the literacy foundations and how they interact to form overall literacy. So these foundations include oral language, reading fluency, written expression, phonemic awareness, spelling, printed word recognition, decoding, and reading comprehension. In the visual, I've given a puzzle with one missing piece, where the missing piece is written expression. This is to go ahead and demonstrate that overall literacy is determined by the interaction of all of these skills. And to have a weakness or deficit in one will contribute to an overall deficit in literacy foundation. So what are the 8 foundations of literacy? First is oral language, which is the system of words and word combinations used to communicate through speech and listening. For example, the way that I'm communicating right now. When I'm speaking, or when someone's speaking and someone else is listening, this is a demonstration of oral language on both parts. Phonemic awareness. The ability to recognize and manipulate phonemes, which are the smallest units of sound in a language. So when we speak on phonemes, I mentioned it briefly, but an example of a phoneme may be t. While we may think of it as t, but because we're only thinking in relationship to sounds, we're thinking about the purest sound possible that can be made. This is a phoneme. Decoding, the application of phonics to map letters to graphemes and phonemes. So, the relationship between t and t. If you see t on a page, you can identify it and know that it's going to say t. This is decoding, except we apply it in larger contexts, such as reading words such as tat or thing. Printed word recognition is the application of decoding and subsequently phonics to map letters into words and assigning words the appropriate meaning. So if I see the word thing, I know that it's most likely an object. That's mapping the word that I've decoded into its appropriate meaning. Spelling, encoding, which is translating spoken words into written words. So if I want to write the word thing, it's about me being able to identify the individual phonemes and graphemes, or in this case, in thing, and writing it out. Reading fluency, the practice of reading accurately at an appropriate rate with proper expression to enable comprehension and motivation. The best way to give an example of reading fluency is to give an example of what's not reading fluency. So for example, if I were to read the definition of reading fluency without practicing proper fluency, the practice of reading accurately at an appropriate rate with proper expression to enable comprehension and motivation. Suddenly your understanding of what's being read is completely different. This is the concept of reading fluency in practice. Reading comprehension, the understanding of a passage's meaning and context. This is pretty straightforward, but it's understanding what you're reading. So it's one thing to be able to tell what the words are. It's another thing to be able to say what the overall meaning is of the sentence. Written expression, the complex process of using symbols to communicate thoughts and ideas. This is the basic concept of writing, and I say basic very generously. As we'll see, written expression has a lot of different components. So let's talk about oral language development. To talk about oral language development, we first need to establish what language is. So when we're speaking of language, we're generally talking about receptive language, oral language, in addition to expressive language or oral language. Two very similar words, but very different. Oral, with an O, relates to speaking. Oral with an AU relates to hearing. To give more detail to that, receptive language is the ability to comprehend spoken and written words through listening or reading. It includes the following skills: phonemic awareness, decoding skills, printed word recognition, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. Expressive language, on the other hand, is the ability to effectively convey thoughts, ideas, and emotions through speaking, writing, or gesturing, which includes the following skills: spelling and written expression. Receptive and expressive language often have a reciprocal relationship, where proficiency in one supports the development of another. Criteria 4. Describe reciprocal relationships. So when we talk about reciprocal relationships, we're talking about when one skill develops, another skill develops. Atypically, there's also the possibility that if one skill develops, another skill declines, but in the case of reading and writing, so overall literacy, what we'll generally see is that when one skill develops, another skill develops. The visual that you see is Scarborough's rope. So Scarborough's rope, amongst other models, established a host of reciprocal relationships. For example, in Scarborough's rope, it says that when phonological awareness increases, word recognition increases. Or when background knowledge increases, language comprehension increases. When language comprehension increases, skilled reading increases. So there's a multitude of reciprocal relationships that are being painted into Scarborough's rope. What we're going to do is go over a few reciprocal relationships. So the first reciprocal relationship that we're going to talk about is oral language exposure and phonological awareness. We touched on this briefly when we were talking about the different factors and how social linguistic is a factor of literacy development. So essentially what we're saying is when someone's exposure to oral language is increased, their overall phonological awareness increased, which means the more you hear someone speaking, the more you'll understand the individual sounds that make up that language. Moving to phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. These have a very equal approach where one influences the other both directions. Phonemic awareness, the ability to identify individual sounds or phonemes, is a subcategory of phonological awareness, which is the ability to recognize and manipulate sound structures. Development of phonemic awareness directly contributes to phonological awareness, while development in other aspects of phonological awareness enables growth in phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness can lead to growth in phonics. Recognizing phonemes allows students to map sounds, phonemes, to graphemes. Phonics contributes to growth in decoding and spelling. Proficiency in phonics enables fluent decoding and encoding. If you understand the individual sounds and how the sounds map to print letters, then you'll be able to apply that knowledge in breaking down printed letters into sounds and taking sounds into printed letters. Decoding and spelling leads to increased skills in word recognition and vocabulary. Strong decoding skills facilitate automatic word recognition. Additionally, good spellers tend to have enhanced orthographic knowledge of word structures, which contribute to more automatic word recognition. Word recognition and vocabulary have a dual relationship. Word recognition supports vocabulary expansion. As you see more words and you recognize more words, generally that aligns with growth in your vocabulary. Additionally, a strong vocabulary aids in confirming decoding words in word recognition. If I see a word and I don't necessarily know how to pronounce it, if I know what word I would put there in context based on my vocabulary, I'm more likely to be able to decode, I'm more likely to be able to recognize what that word is. Word recognition and vocabulary lead to increased comprehension. Reading fluently frees up cognitive resources for comprehension, as we saw in Baddeley's model.